The salesman laughed so hard that the entire showroom turned to look, but the single father standing beside his battered old pickup didn't laugh back. He simply looked at the dealership owner, folded the crumpled papers in his hand, and quietly said that one day they would wish they had treated him differently. 3 hours later, that same man would sit across from the dealership's owners with enough power to change their lives forever. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you can be part of our family and our community. The man's name was Everett Callahan, a 38-year-old single father who had learned to measure life in smaller units than most people did. He measured it in grocery receipts, school lunches, overdue utility notices, and the number of miles his old blue 1998 Ford F-150 could travel before making a strange noise. The truck had faded paint, a cracked windshield in one corner, a dented passenger door, and an engine that sounded rough whenever Everett started it. To most people, it was an embarrassing relic. To Everett, it was the last thing his late father had ever given him, the vehicle that had carried him home from the hospital with his newborn daughter, and the same truck that had taken him to hundreds of job sites while he worked his way through years of hardship. He kept it running because replacing it was not an option. His daughter, Maisie, was 9 years old, bright, observant, and far too familiar with the sacrifices her father made for her. Everett had promised her that someday they would have a better life. He just never promised when that someday would come. That morning, Everett drove his old truck into Hawthorne Ridge Motors because he had finally decided to try something he had been afraid to do for years. His small construction company had grown slowly from a one-man operation into a respected local business. Everett repaired aging buildings, restored historic properties, and specialized in difficult structural work that larger contractors often refused. He had recently secured several major contracts, and a financial partner had encouraged him to expand. Everett needed several commercial vehicles and was prepared to purchase them from Hawthorne Ridge Motors. More importantly, he was carrying a proposal that could eventually lead to a fleet agreement worth millions of dollars. He wasn't there to show off. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there because he needed a business relationship, and he believed people should be judged by their work rather than their appearance. The moment Everett stepped through the glass doors, however, 2 salesmen glanced toward the parking lot and started whispering. One looked at the truck and then at Everett's worn work jacket before quietly laughing. Another joked that the dealership had probably become a charity without telling anyone. Everett heard them. He pretended not to. He had spent too many years being underestimated to let a few careless remarks break him. But when he approached a polished salesman named Preston Vale and explained that he was interested in purchasing a fleet, Preston looked him up and down and asked whether Everett was sure he hadn't confused Hawthorne Ridge with a used parts yard. Everett calmly handed him his business card and explained what his company did. Preston barely glanced at it before passing it to another employee with a smirk. The humiliation became worse when Preston asked Everett whether he was actually prepared to pay for the vehicles or whether he simply wanted to take them for a test drive. A few employees laughed. One customer looked uncomfortable and walked away. Everett's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. He explained that he had brought financial documents and a formal proposal and simply wanted someone qualified to review them. Instead, Preston told him the dealership was interested in serious buyers and suggested that Everett visit a smaller lot across town. Everett looked around the showroom one last time. He saw expensive cars beneath bright lights, polished floors without a single stain, and people who believed wealth was visible in a person's clothes. Then he looked through the window at his old truck. Everett remembered his father standing beside that truck years earlier, telling him that a machine didn't become worthless because its paint faded. What mattered was whether it still carried people where they needed to go. Everett smiled faintly, thanked the receptionist for her time, and walked outside. Before he reached the truck, however, an older woman hurried after him. Her name was Marjorie Bell, and she had worked at Hawthorne Ridge Motors for nearly 25 years. She had witnessed everything from inside the service department and was visibly embarrassed by how Everett had been treated. She apologized, but Everett told her not to worry. He had learned something painful but useful that day. Sometimes a person's behavior tells you more about the person standing in front of you than it ever tells you about the person being judged. Everett drove away without anger. What he didn't know was that his departure had been noticed by someone else. Across town, a private investment group was conducting due diligence on Hawthorne Ridge Motors. The dealership had been struggling for months. Its owners had borrowed heavily to renovate the showroom, sales had declined, inventory costs were rising, and the company had recently lost a major commercial account. The investment group had been considering purchasing a controlling interest, but they were searching for a new operating partner who understood modern logistics and commercial fleet management. One of the analysts reviewing potential partners happened to recognize Everett's company name from a recent construction project. When she pulled the financial records, she discovered something nobody at Hawthorne Ridge had bothered to investigate. Everett Callahan wasn't a struggling contractor. He was the founder of Callahan Restoration Group, a company that had recently completed several high-value restoration projects and was negotiating contracts across 3 states. More importantly, Everett's company was preparing to establish its own transportation division, and the fleet purchase he had attempted to discuss that morning was only the beginning. His total projected vehicle spending over the next several years could exceed $10 million. The analyst immediately contacted her director, who asked why Everett hadn't already been approached. She explained that he had visited Hawthorne Ridge that morning. The director asked how the meeting went. The answer left the room silent. While Everett spent the afternoon at his office reviewing contracts, he received a call from an investment executive named Celeste Rowan. She apologized for contacting him unexpectedly and asked whether he was still considering a fleet partnership with Hawthorne Ridge Motors. Everett paused. He could have taken revenge. He could have told her exactly what had happened and demanded that the dealership suffer for it. Instead, he simply explained the truth. He said he was willing to discuss business, but only if everyone involved was treated with dignity. That sentence changed everything. Celeste arranged a meeting with Everett and several members of the investment group. During the meeting, Everett presented more than a purchasing plan. He presented a vision. He explained that small businesses were often treated like inconveniences by large dealerships, even though small businesses collectively represented enormous long-term value. He proposed creating a commercial fleet division focused on contractors, tradespeople, delivery companies, and independent operators. He wanted transparent pricing, reliable service, flexible financing, and a program that valued customers who worked hard rather than customers who simply looked wealthy. The investors were impressed. But they still had one question: would Everett consider helping them acquire Hawthorne Ridge Motors? Everett sat quietly for several seconds. He thought about Preston's laughter. He thought about the old truck. He thought about his father. And he thought about Maisie. He could have said yes simply to prove that the people who mocked him had made a terrible mistake. But revenge wasn't the reason he had survived all those difficult years. His father had taught him that success meant having the power to hurt someone and choosing not to. Everett agreed to help, but only under one condition: Hawthorne Ridge Motors would not be destroyed. It would be rebuilt. The acquisition moved quickly. The dealership's financial position was worse than anyone had realized, and the owners accepted the investment group's offer. Everett became a major partner in the new company, taking responsibility for the commercial division and customer experience. When the announcement reached the dealership, employees gathered around the office television in disbelief. Then Everett walked through the same glass doors. Only this time, nobody laughed. Preston was standing behind the showroom desk when he saw him. His face lost its color. He recognized the old truck parked outside and then recognized the man who had walked away from it earlier that day. Everett didn't gloat. He didn't remind Preston of every insult. He simply asked him to join the meeting. Preston expected to be fired. Instead, Everett asked him why he had treated a customer that way. Preston struggled to answer. His arrogance slowly disappeared, replaced by embarrassment. He admitted that he had judged Everett by his clothes, his truck, and the way he looked. He admitted that he had assumed Everett couldn't afford the vehicles because Everett didn't look like the wealthy customers he was accustomed to serving. Then he confessed something that surprised everyone. His father had been a mechanic, and Preston had spent years trying to escape the shame he associated with poverty. Somewhere along the way, he had started looking down on the very people who reminded him of where he came from. Everett listened. He could have ended Preston's career with a single decision. Instead, he offered him a second chance. Everett told Preston that he could remain with the company, but only if he was willing to change. He wanted Preston to become part of a new training program that would teach every employee how to treat customers with dignity regardless of appearance, income, occupation, or vehicle. Preston accepted, and over the following months, something remarkable happened. The salesman who had once mocked an old truck became one of the strongest advocates for treating working-class customers with respect. Marjorie Bell stayed too. Everett promoted her to oversee customer relations because she had been one of the only people that day willing to do the right thing when nobody was watching. But the greatest change happened outside the dealership. One afternoon, Everett arrived at Maisie's school in the same battered blue truck. His daughter climbed into the passenger seat and noticed that he looked unusually happy. She asked what had happened. Everett told her that he had bought a dealership. Maisie stared at him in disbelief before laughing so hard that she nearly dropped her backpack. Then she asked whether he was going to buy a new truck. Everett laughed too. He told her maybe someday. Then he looked at the cracked windshield, placed his hand on the steering wheel, and explained that this old truck had carried them through some of the hardest years of their lives. He didn't want to erase those years. He wanted to remember them. Months later, the dealership unveiled its new commercial division. The old showroom had been transformed. A portion of the building was dedicated to small business owners, independent contractors, tradespeople, and families who had once felt uncomfortable walking into expensive dealerships. Everett insisted that the first display vehicle remain modest, practical, and affordable. Above it hung a simple message: respect the person before you measure the price tag. On opening day, hundreds of people arrived. Many were customers who had never felt welcome in places like that before. Everett stood near the entrance with Maisie beside him, watching families walk through the doors without fear of being judged. Then he saw Preston approaching an elderly construction worker whose truck was even older than Everett's. Preston smiled, shook the man's hand, and treated him with genuine respect. Everett watched quietly. That was the moment he realized he had won something far greater than a dealership. He had changed the meaning of success. He hadn't taken the dealership from people who laughed at him because he wanted revenge. He had taken the opportunity to build something better from a place that had forgotten what kindness meant. His old truck had brought him there, but compassion had carried him the rest of the way. Before Everett left that afternoon, he stood beside his father's old truck and placed his hand on the hood. The paint was still faded. The dent was still there. The windshield still had its little crack. Nothing about the truck looked valuable. But Everett smiled. Because sometimes the things people laugh at are the very things that carried you when nobody else did. And sometimes the person they underestimate isn't waiting for revenge. He's waiting for the right moment to prove that character is worth more than appearances. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before you go, leave a meaningful comment telling us what you believe Everett's old truck represented in his life: struggle, love, sacrifice, or the strength to keep moving forward. Because the greatest lesson wasn't that Everett eventually owned a dealership. It was that he became successful without becoming cruel, powerful without becoming arrogant, and wealthy without forgetting the man who once had almost nothing. His old truck had never been worthless. It had simply been carrying a story that the people laughing at it were too blind to see.